There's been a moment for me in building Groove where I shifted from this is a sprint to I really want to run this marathon. Like I found something that brought me joy, that was like a container that continues to allow me to grow. When that internal shift happens, you don't know where it's going. It's like, oh, I want to make sure I can run this for a long time. And in that shift, it allowed me to take a step back and go, okay, how do I redesign how I work so I can do it for the long term? And I just hope for people that are listening, if there's enough internal clarity, that you now give yourself the space to take a step back and say, how do I make this work for me as much as the world around me? Welcome to Finding Your Groove. If you're living and working in a way that's in sync with who you are or you want to be, then you're in the right place. Each episode, we swap stories with guests who have found out that the traditional path isn't set up for people like us. The podcast was created to help listeners like you feel less alone on this journey. Through stories and being in community with each other, we can avoid burnout and inspire each other to keep going.
On today's episode, we're doing something a little different. We're peeling back the curtain on the journey of my co-host, Josh Green. Josh is a startup founder and community builder who, on his non-traditional path, has owned different businesses, has built music festivals and special gatherings for thousands of people, and even worked a year as Adam Newman's chief of staff at WeWork. Josh shares insights on his later in life ADHD diagnosis, how his support systems have shaped him, and the magic of having a good grounding routine. We've worked together for 3.5 years now, so it was sweet to give some space to these conversations and stories. And honestly, after this episode, we're dreaming of doing more conversations on the podcast, just the two of us, on very specific topics, so we can get even more into the weeds with these types of rich stories. So stay tuned for that. Let's go ahead and jump on in. Josh, what did you bring for show and tell today?
Oh my gosh, so good to have time, just us talking about stuff. I brought a collection of fidget toys. So it's not a collection, by the way. It should be a selection of fidget toys, because before I even show you fidget toys end up being things that are like bought and lost. So I tend to go online and buy a 10-pack of a variety of toys, and then they end up in a bunch of different places, whether they're in my bag or sat on my desk or by my bed or by the couch. They move around the house as I do and sort of get picked up and dropped.
This is like my version of hair ties. Like my hair ties just are everywhere and anywhere and in every like nook and cranny. So that is my version of this. Wow. Okay. Would love to hear what the differences are between the ones that you've brought.
So I just grabbed a handful. I don't even like some of them, but we can talk about why I don't like some of them too. Okay. But one that I really like is this pair of, it's like two like keychain loops with a ball, like ball bearings between them, and the fidget motion is that it like twists. So this is a nice one because you can do it one-handed. So it doesn't require two hands to fidget with. I mean, actually a bunch of these are one-handed. So this is number one. This is in the I like it and I reach for it often. Classic spinner. Always important to... Actually, I use this a lot. I like the sensation of moving it and feeling the resistance. Gyroscopic resistance? I don't know. Maybe that's the right physics term. But yeah, that's really enjoyable just to like play with it like this in my day. One that I don't like, a fake game controller that has a bunch of different clicks, and it has like clicks and a joystick that doesn't do anything. I never use this. It has some weird spring on the bottom and a clicky button on the back.
Wow.
I've never reached for that. So that's 3 of the collection. Yeah, so I have these with me often, and I brought them today because they are reflective of me finding ways to sort of like regulate my energy or keep my focus throughout my day when otherwise I might be easily distracted or find it hard to get my mind to settle.
It's funny because I feel like fidget toys became cool. Like, what a funny thing to become cool. But several years ago, I feel like they took over the schools. It was like a cool thing for like kids to be using fidget toys in classes. So it's kind of an interesting wave to think about how that also then like led to more adults using them, also like in the workplace and like in office settings. I know that that's like a thing that people would get at a like a corporate event where it would be like a branded fidget toy. Like what a fun world we live in, that that's something that's embraced. I'm curious, what was that?
Were you allowed to use it in the classroom, like at school?
I think kids. Well, it was like it wasn't cool when I was in the classroom. When I was in college, it was cool. So a little
Did
different.
you ever own a fidget toy?
I don't think I have ever owned one. No, I think but I remember my little brothers having them. Yeah, I'm trying to think. If I'm much of a fidgeter, like if I would even enjoy that type of a thing. You know, here's the thing: I hate metal. I hate the sound of metal against metal. I can't drink out of a metal cup. Like I have a lot of
fidget toy.
Yeah, so I would need to really like feel and see them.
This is like a plastic spinner that's also magnetic.
Oh, that's kind of fun.
It's kind of fun, right?
Yeah.
Oh, one of the things I should have brought today, but I don't know where it is also using like the stretchy material, like
Play-Doh?
Not Play-Doh, but it's like Play-Doh, but you can just use it infinitely. It never dries out. Silly putty.
Mm-hmm.
I also have that, and I like playing with that.
I do have Play-Doh, so I guess that's my version of it. Okay, wait. So before we head off of fidget toys, I would love to hear when did this start, and do you have any early memories of having a version of a fidget toy, even if it was like a pen that you loved that kind of allowed you to fidget in the classroom? Like, do you remember anything early on?
Interestingly, at school, I didn't really stay in the classroom.
What does that mean?
I like avoided classrooms as much as possible. I used to go and hide in the technology department. I was not the kid that sat in the class. And I didn't have fidget toys, but I used to just doodle a lot. Like I would just draw aimlessly and mindlessly on anything that was close to me. And that's probably what kept me present in class. For sure in high school. In high school, or as we called it in England, secondary school, I don't have memories of like sitting in classrooms. I have memories from like hiding from being in classrooms.
I feel like this is a good transition to talk a little bit about your early days of like the moments of recognizing that you didn't like doing things the normal way. You didn't like sitting in the classroom. What were some of those initial moments where you realized like, oh, this is not my way of doing things. I like bending the rules and sneaking into the tech room.
It's interesting because I don't see myself as intentional. Like I don't have a problem with rules. Like I live quite a rule-bound life, and I really value structure when it serves me. And I think in my early part of my life there was just a lot of structure that didn't really serve me. And you know, as someone that was diagnosed with ADHD later in life and had a unconventional experience of going through an education system. I went through very conventional schools. My experience of it was not conventional. Putting the pieces together now, a lot of it makes much more sense. But at the time, I was just figuring out ways that worked for me to make it through the day, let alone have a thriving experience of work. Where it would just be like, wow, being in school is really hard for me. So in that experience, I guess I found lots of different ways to make it possible. Like I would go to the classes I really liked, mainly like science, mathematics, technology, stuff that was like building or thinking or using that engineering part of my brain. And I would pretty much avoid at all costs going to anything that involved writing or just remembering facts or information. So all of humanities were like off the table. And I was for sure, if in the classroom, the kid at the back that was just chatting to my friend the whole time. and being told off for not paying attention.
But you somehow got by.
I mean, it's an interesting thing of like what it means to somehow get by. I think probably a reason why my ADHD was undiagnosed for so long was because I was getting by, in the sense that I did well enough that no one was concerned about me in that respect. So I was always, maybe I wasn't the top of the class, but I was always in the top 5 or 10% of the class, apart from humanities, in the things I cared about. And people were like, okay, cool. Yeah, he's like doing okay. So no one was concerned, or it didn't raise an eyelid from any of the teaching staff to think, oh, maybe Josh needs some different kind of support and he would really be thriving in school.
Mm-hmm.
I think only when I got to college, I was like, wow, the academic world is just, I was just never designed for it. And I'm not really going to thrive in it. Was
there a moment that made you realize that? Like what, like, can you bring us into a specific story or moment when you had that feeling?
I dropped out in the second year of being in college, in university, pretty quickly into the second year. I think, the first year was just, I did fine. Like I didn't do well. I think there was a very clear feedback loop that I didn't really know how to sit and study. Like I didn't have those skills to sit and prepare for an exam. And up until the end of school, before going off to university, that didn't really matter because I was able to pass the exams and do well without having to study. And I think when I got to college and we got to the end of the exams of the first year, and I don't know what to do right now. Like I can't sit and revise. I don't like to retain information in this way. I don't know how to navigate this situation. Was one of the first moments that I realized, oh, I don't know if I was built for this, and I'm probably not going to excel at this. And then I went away for the summer and then came back to college in my second year. I reflected on, wow, for me to do well in academia, I'm going to have to change such fundamental pieces of who I am. And at the time, I really thought it was me that was broken, right? Everyone around me is managing how to do this great. And I know I'm just as intelligent as the people that I'm surrounded by. And yet I'm finding the same thing really difficult. At the time, I don't think I really appreciated, my response to it was like, okay, I'm just going to leave. I'm not going to do well in academia. I don't have the skills. For some reason, there's like a disconnect between channeling my intelligence and understanding into coursework and exams and the whole model that academia is set up for understanding competency. I was just like, okay, cool, I'm going to leave. I don't know. I guess like the administrator of the physics department, I was studying mathematics and physics, but it came from the physics department my course lived within physics. He thought I was a bit crazy. You're doing okay. You're not top of the class. Like, just work harder. But I didn't feel like I had the skills, or it just didn't feel possible to turn who I was into a person that was going to thrive in that environment. And therefore, like, okay, cool, I'm going to leave.
So then what happened? You go back home.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for my parents because I pretty much decided, and I remember very vividly, I called my mum. Well, I think I spoke to my dad first, and he was like, I actually can't remember the conversation with my dad, but I'm pretty sure I would have called him first. And then I call my mum.
There's like an order to this.
Yeah, and then I call my mum, and my mum's like, she said, if you leave Bath now, which was where I was studying, and you come home, you'll be home in time for dinner. I'm going to make lasagna. I know you like it, and we can talk about everything then. And just was super supportive and loving. And yeah, I just felt very safe in, I don't know what's going to be next, but I feel good about the decision. I feel supported in the decision by my family, which is a reoccurring theme in my life and definitely gave me a lot of possibility to think differently or to not feel constrained by normative systems. I never was the person that wanted to break out the system. I just wanted a system that worked for me. And I think only in the past 5 years have I started to understand like maybe what was going on in that search. So I dropped out and I came home. Yeah.
So then from there, though, I feel like you've talked about how you felt like your first job was kind of traditional.
Oh,
right?
yeah. So there was a lot happening at the same time. And maybe that just compounded the experience that we didn't even talk about. While I was at university, I was on a scholarship program from a very large engineering firm called MBDA. And they very kindly paid for me to go to college, covered all of my tuition fees, and gave me a paid summer job every summer. And that was, I worked for them for the year between high school and college. They put me through a year of an apprenticeship, paid internship. And then every summer while I was at college, I used to go and do a summer internship. I guess it was only one summer because I left.
Right.
And it was interesting because in that environment, I think that there were a lot more people that were neurodiverse in that environment. I think by the nature of working, to this day, I was surrounded by the smartest group of people that I've ever worked around. So it was really nice. And I think there were lots of norms that were just allowed people that were neurodiverse to or had learning disorders. I don't know what the right term is. But there was a variety of different people that were neurodiverse in that company. And I'm not sure I was so aware of it at the time, but I knew that there was space to be different there and to work in different ways. My main issue with working in a company like that was mainly the fact that I didn't like the industry. The projects were too slow and too long. It took too much time to go from concept to a product that was in service or being sold to a customer, etc., etc. So, and they actually said, well, even if you don't finish a degree, you can just stay and have a job here. But it wasn't appealing to me. I think there was just a whole part of me that was more curious about exploring different things that were interesting to me at the time than that were coming through. Because, before I went to college, I just wanted to be a car mechanic. That was my career aspiration, to be a mechanic on a Formula One team and travel the world and design Formula One cars. And I think as I entered that period of these different worlds, studying science, being in engineering, there were new movements or new parts of myself that I was discovering that I wanted to be able to explore.
So then you start doing things differently. You're like, okay, I'm no longer in this traditional school system. I start doing things differently. And when is that reinforced for you that that's a good choice? That you're like, oh, this is feeling good. I've found something where it's checking a lot of the boxes that maybe I wasn't feeling supported by in the traditional school system. When is a moment that you can bring us into that feels like that?
I started a company after I left college with a school friend. It was a digital marketing agency, and that was a whole journey in its own right. It took us into, our main customers were music brands, live music brands, record labels, big live events companies, AEG, Live Nation, these sort of large companies that promote sort of very large artists, which got me really interested in just how do people gather? How do you create amazing experiences for people? How do you craft memories? How do you sell stuff to people where they're really passionate, excited about it? And the agency didn't work out. Maybe there's some stuff to unpack, but it did become a really interesting stepping stone into festivals, because I then started working for some of the clients, and I must have been 22 at the time, maybe 23. And I managed to go on this journey where I moved over from the agency side to working on festivals. And festivals was the sort of first time where I realized there are large parts of society that work differently, operate differently, think differently. And I seemed to stumble upon a group of humans that all were wonderfully creative, very human-centric, but lived life way beyond work. It was we love putting on great experiences for people. And at the same time, we realized there's something more. And even things, the fact that the cadence of the way that people work year round, and I've been thinking about this a lot now recently in my life. And when we were speaking to Alice Catter on a previous episode, I was thinking about this sort of like seasonal movements of career, of life. When I started working on festivals where you work really hard in the spring and the summer, and then you rest in some ways in the autumn and the winter. And actually your annual salary is made in 8 months of the year rather than 12 months of the year. Mm-hmm. But maybe you work the equivalent of 12 months hours just in 8 months. But that actually, there are different ways of working that are possible that aren't just showing up to a 9 to 5 in a company every day. Mm-hmm. And that, I really thrived in that environment. I thrived in these like short bursts of high energy, a lot of passion that I can channel my excitement into, and then time to recharge, like time to slow down and be with myself and travel and not be bound by the things that I now understand are hard for me. You know, like structure is really good for me. I need time to slow down. I need soft, slow starts to my day. Like getting up and being in this like urgent on energy really throws my nervous system out massively. Mm-hmm. And I think working in festivals was a big moment where I realized, wow, you can do life differently. Like it can be different, and you can be happy, and you can thrive, and you can make impact, and you can make money. And that was probably the beginning from redefining the narrative around a career that really pushed me in a direction like that. I'm so curious because you never really had the conventional corporate 9 to 5 job.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
How you sort of crafted, like, I'm curious, like, did you have a story of what work was going to look like for you when you were coming out of college? Did you like assume you would go and join a large company or go through a graduate program?
I really didn't. Yeah, it's funny. I guess I didn't know what it would look like, but I trusted myself that it would be different and that it would feel very me. I remember I was talking to, I always, I guess background is I always thought it would be a smart decision for me to save money earlier in my career. And so I made the choice that like whatever I was going to do first out of college was going to be an opportunity where I could live at home for at least a year. And so that automatically put some parameters on it. But when you live an hour and 15 minutes from New York City, it was like not like I was living in the middle of nowhere. So it's interesting because I remember looking at a bunch of companies. One company in particular is it was like a dairy yogurt company that like people would know. And it was this big ass company, super corporate, but they have like their headquarters within a range that I was willing to drive. And I remember thinking like, does their social impact team actually make impact? And like, can I be a part of that part of the business and on a corporate team that's like focused on the impact piece of it? There was another like skincare brand that I looked at that I was also curious about, like, how does that help people? And so I was really looking at like, can I be in a corporate setting, but on an impact team, or working in a nonprofit, which was a difficult choice to make as someone who just gone to college and had a bunch of student loans. Like, should I make that choice at this stage? Like, does that make sense? So that was a lot of where my brain was at, but then also curious, like, about this group. I'm sure we'll talk about this another time too, but like this curious about like business owners in general, having seen like the startup ecosystem in my college town, and was like, is there something that I could do to support business owners? And a couple of conversations and like a couple of workshops led to me figuring out how I could do that. So yeah, I really didn't see myself in a traditional setting. And as an advertising student, there were so many moments where people would ask, and I would visit agencies in New York, and people would ask like, oh, do you think you're going to go agency side? And I just was like, I freaking hope not. Like, I do not want to do that.
It's so cool to hear your clarity at that age of just like, oh, at that moment in your life, where I'm sure we're going to get into that in another episode.
Yeah.
Where you started to become clear about, oh, what are the steps I'm taking to make sure that my life that I'm designing really works for me, or I feel lit up by.
Let's go ahead and take a quick break to hear from a member of our community, Groove. Living life this way isn't always easy, so let's phone a friend to hear a piece of advice from them. Cole Johnson is a community manager for heart-centered organizations and the human connection alchemist with the Octopus Movement, supporting atypical thinkers. Cole, I would love to hear, what is one change that has transformed how you work from home?
This is a great question, Taylor, and I'm sure that as entrepreneurs, creatives, people that work from home, sure we all know that feeling of fatigue beginning to set in from time to time. I know that I've prided myself on integrating movement into my morning and evening rituals for the longest time, and yet I still found myself stressed, anxious, and overwhelmed for most of my days, and I couldn't figure out why. But then when I took a step back, I realized that I was attempting to concentrate throughout most of my days without taking any breaks from the screens. And so what I decided to do was take a daily walk in nature every single day, no matter what. I remind myself that even 10 minutes is better than 0 minutes. And what this has in turn helped me with is remain so much more grounded. It's helped me be at peace with the present moment. It's reignited my creative spark. And I think more than anything else, it has helped me not feel the need to attach myself to any particular outcome along this ebb and flow journey of life that we are all experiencing.
Thank you so much, Cole, for sharing. To learn more about Cole and co-work with freelancers, business owners, and other work-from-homers just like Cole inside of Groove, go ahead and check out the show notes below. Now, back to the conversation. I'm curious, going back to your festivals, like, you know, one of the things that we bond over a lot is like the experience that someone else, like watching the magic of something come to life, whether someone has a big aha moment or something changes for them there, or you get to surprise and delight someone in a way that just makes their day. I'm curious if there's like one moment from all of the festivals that you were part of that you were like, I know that made an impact, and I'm so glad that I did that.
I worked on a really magical festival called Wilderness, which was at a very high level was about how does nature shape the arts and culture. So it was a beautiful estate called Cornbury Park in Oxfordshire, and had everything there from amazing mainstream artists playing and headlining the main stage, but also a spa, and Ottolenghi would come and do like these banquets for 900 people. So these just like amazing different chefs coming and hosting. It was just like a variety and immersive theater, etc., etc. But I just have this memory of the last night of the festival. One of the things that we built was there's a beautiful valley that goes down to the lake, and it was the late night party zone. And there would be DJs playing in there till 4, 5, 6 a.m. And I have this memory of like the last night, maybe year 3 or year 4 of the festival. So there was probably about 25,000 people at the festival in total, and maybe 4,000 people in this valley at 3 a.m. Mm-hmm. And I just sat and I watched people like coming out of the valley, like just... And all I remember is like, I was watching what was happening, and I was watching people come up the hill to head back to the campsites. And it was a stream of smiles that still brings me joy to remember, wow, after 3 or 4 days camping in nature, in the wild, immersed in culture and wonderful humans, this is how people are feeling on a Sunday night, way into the night. And that last night was a moment to remember of how much delight we brought to people, and how those memories were going to be memories for a lifetime. We weren't creating something that would be forgotten in a few days or a few weeks. That there will be moments where people came, and you know, it was such a broad cross-section of society coming together that you were taking people out of their, you know, there were accountants and creatives and hippies and politicians, that people were coming out of their normal day-to-day life and seeing, oh, well, there's a way to live or a way to experience something that I don't find on my day-to-day. And even if they were just going back to their same jobs, it was like, going back a different person with a new memory, with a new experience, with a new heart. And those Sunday night watching people go to bed for the last time or like head home for the last time always brought the most joy to my face. To me.
I feel like what's interesting too about like your journey, well, I think it's interesting how the example you just shared is so tied to nature and your love for nature as well. Like that seems to make a lot of sense, like just as a thread of you as a human being. But then also I think it's interesting to think about, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, like what we choose to say yes to. So when we're at a moment of crossroads of like I have a decision in front of me and we're paving these paths that might not have a clear map for like which direction should I go in? Should I stay to run wilderness for another year or should I not? Or should I, take this opportunity to go work with Adam Newman at WeWork? I think that being like such a interesting conversation that was like an opportunity for you to say, oh, this maybe wasn't a path that I was even thinking about taking, but suddenly this path has appeared. Do I go down it? And so I'm curious how you've navigated those different paths, whether they're ones that you were sort of expecting to navigate or other ones that maybe like popped out of nowhere and then you decided to take them. Like, what is your compass for saying yes or no to those opportunities?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I would have never been able to guess the next opportunity in my career, like maybe even 3 months before it happened. In the sense that I guess we touched on it a little bit, but I think one of the things I've been grateful for is the sense of building a compass, not just a compass of or just clarity of direction that I want to go in life, maybe less of what that might look like, but a lot of awareness. I developed a pretty deep meditation practice when I was working in music festivals, a practice called Vipassana. I used to go on these annual 10-day silent retreats and becoming deeply connected to myself was a very important part of my 20s in a variety of ways. And the second half of my 20s more so than the first half. And I really developed a trust over time, and maybe making decisions like leaving university when it wasn't serving me and didn't feel right anymore was probably a big validator and a muscle builder of the muscle of like, oh wow, am I enjoying this? Is this serving me? Am I creating value? Am I learning? Am I growing? Being able to ask myself those questions and not stagnating. And maybe it will come full circle when I think about building Groove being sort of the project that I've worked on for the longest and still brings me a lot of joy, is because it's an environment where so many of those questions that might not have been able to be answered clearly at the beginning of my career. Am I serving the people that I'm passionate about? Am I growing? Am I creating meaningful, valuable impact in their lives? Is this something that I see can grow in meaningful ways? Continues to be answered and continues to stretch me in new ways. So there's no, I'm getting bored, I need to try and do something else. There's like, oh, how do I evolve within that? But going back to my 20s and making decisions, learning to trust the answers to those questions in the moment has really been a core muscle of being able to have a career that's unexpected, and continues to refine in terms of getting me closer to, a kind of groove or a kind of direction that really brings fullness or wholeness in a much richer way than it did at some of the moments in my 20s when I was doing things that I maybe enjoyed, but now there's just like a much more holistic resonance of all of the different parts of what I work on and how I work.
Well, I did my homework for this podcast episode, and
How did you do that?
Well, I watched Inside Out 2 last night. And we talked about this on a previous podcast episode about how I hadn't yet watched. And I was curious as we go into like this kind of final part of the pod episode today, final section, I should say. I'm curious, now that I've watched Inside Out 2, and for anyone that has not watched it, it is an amazing film that talks all about emotions. And I think there's a lot for us to learn as adults about the, in some ways, quite simple way that they share these emotions, but then also the complexities of it and like holding the duality of that together and whatnot. I'm curious, like, as you think about those moments when you've had to make big decisions, what's going on in your little brain with all of those emotions? How has your meditation practice, how have the way that you've learned to like ground yourself and trust yourself like changed maybe how your brain has operated in those moments over time?
Again, like I see a lot of things as like building muscles, which don't happen super intellectually. They happen by repeated behaviors and patterns over time that become ways that we move through the world. That the big change about making decisions that I've fostered and seen lots of success in my own life and people around me that operate like this, and anyone listening, I highly suggest sort of learning 2 dimensions. One has been with the big decisions in my life, those big moments, is learning how to quiet the chatter and connect deeply to what some of the questions that we mentioned before around what's going on for me right now and what's important for me right now, and giving space to be able to hear deeper answers to that, balanced with healthy ways of surrounding myself with people that know me better. Like, I think one of the big changes from my 20s when I decided to leave college to now is, as I've gone through big moments of transition, I have a group of humans around me that are definitely my soul family, you know, my real deep kindred spirits that can help see through my own internal biases to challenge my perspective, or to add to my perspective, or enhance or enrich my perspective, to be able to feel conviction and confidence about making big, difficult, sometimes decisions about steps in life. And I think the intersection of both of those has been so key to being able to feel, a high level of conviction around the next step, especially when the next step might emerge as unknown. And I've never been, and I think there's a lot of wisdom when people make decisions in life to create multiple options. Like, I don't just get one job offer. I see the 2 or 3 things out there that allow me to see, okay, why would I pick one direction or another? And if you're optimizing for career, in a conventional career approach, if you're optimizing for highest compensation package or best job title or where I'm going to learn the most, having those kind of options is really helpful. There is another way to sort of like move through the world. And I definitely found a lot of joy by just responding to the emergent signals that feel really resonant, and doing that both on my own and also with the people around me, because it just means like every chapter is another interesting chapter. And like, if I think for me, I want to be able to look back on my life and my career and being like, oh, chapter 6 and chapter 12 brought me such interesting moments, like allow me to grow in such interesting ways. And they're going to be great to write. Like, writing that chapter about building festivals with some really wonderful creative humans that inspired me, and putting smiles and creating memories for thousands of people will be a great chapter. Being Adam Newman's chief of staff and working in WeWork in that hyper growth phase will also be a really interesting chapter to write at some point. And building Groove will be another amazing chapter. And then moving from cities to live on a farm in Virginia will be another great chapter. But if I try to weigh things up with like, now I'm going to craft 5 different options for where it goes next, I don't know if the chapter that emerged would have been the most interesting. I think it might have looked quite boring. I think there's been this thing about trusting the emergence, that it's not always optimizing for the perfect thing, but it's about trusting the internal signals So there's something interesting for me happening right now, and because it's coming into my world right now, I should respond to it.
To bring it back to Inside Out too, I think something that I found interesting from the movie, which relates to what you're sharing, is like how we really are like all of those memories get collected over time. And that idea that they like went down and were playing the strings of things that the little girl, I can't think of her name right now.
They became beliefs.
Yeah, exactly. They became.
Well, I think that's
beliefs
what's
about
interesting.
herself.
The memories became beliefs.
Yeah. And some of them were beliefs that were positive of I'm a really kind person. And other times there were beliefs in there that were not so nice to herself. Riley, is that her name?
Yeah, Riley.
Yeah. And so, sometimes it was even things like, in order to have friends, I must do X, Y, and Z, or my hair must look this way, or whatever. And so when you combine all those things, that forms, how she thinks on like a greater level about herself. And I think that's what's so interesting is when we think about life as, a collection of, we're collecting these beliefs over time, as we look back on those chapters, it's a really cool thing to be able to look at them in chapters of beliefs and say, what beliefs became truer in that moment for me?
Yeah.
Or what did I learn about myself that I didn't know before that chapter? Or what did I believe then that like now in this chapter, I'm rewriting that belief. Like there's something really cool about that piece of life. And it reminds me of another episode we did with Geetika about like collecting dots versus connecting dots and being able to look at those experiences and like look back at them. What a gift that we get to go and do that.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. Is there a story that comes up for you about that? Of a chapter that maybe things shifted or that an important belief was formed?
I think this is an interesting one because it's an early example, but I think that it was a belief that got stronger with time. But also weaker at times, which is an interesting thing to think about how our beliefs can kind of go through that, where we believe one thing really strongly, maybe as a kid, and then over time that belief kind of gets like fainter and fainter or weaker and then comes back as an adult. But when I was in second grade, I had this teacher, his name was Mr. Wolf, and he was very focused on writing, was like the core of everything, that it just meant so much. If you can write, you can do anything kind of a vibe. Like he just really leaned into it, and he really wanted to help kids that didn't like writing.
I should have been in his class.
Yeah. And
now, because now I love writing and value it deeply, even if I don't love doing it.
Yeah. And he it was his first year of teaching too, which I think is just a really cool experience to be the first class for someone's first year of teaching. And so, yeah, I was in second grade, and he hosted he was someone who bent the rules, I feel like. And when I was in elementary school, like teachers could do that so much more than they can now, where they would have an idea and then they would be like, we're going to take over the cafeteria that night and do X, Y, and Z. So we like took over the cafeteria and we had poetry night. And so we all had to prep our poems, and you got to bring your parents, and you got to bring like a friend if you wanted. And so I remember my friend Avery came. Avery and I are still friends. She lives in New York City as well now. And anyways, we went and I shared my poems. And as I was on the podium in the cafeteria of my elementary school sharing my poems and having these conversations afterwards, that's when I really felt like I'm a good writer. Like that belief was like true. And like, also, I'm a good speaker. I didn't feel the fear that some of my classmates shared as they got up on that podium. I got up there and was like, hell yeah, I'm getting in front of this microphone. and so I think that it was that day that I realized that both of those things were skills or like things that people admired, but also like worked really, really hard to get good at. And I somehow had this like gut instinct and attraction and like love for it that some of those fears and like maybe negative thoughts like didn't come up so much. And so as a second grader, I really like started to believe those things that night in the poetry, at poetry night. And I think as I got older, I think that belief at times became weaker. I think that, I think at times, whether it was like in college when I'm trying to fit into a certain box of a way a certain professor wants me to write, or, even I think like my first job working with an author, it's so funny how my writing, like for obvious reasons, was not the star of the show when working with an author. And so I think that until like I started writing the Groove newsletter and really writing the emails that, Groovers get today, and the care that I put into those, and then also like writing more on LinkedIn. And I wrote a lot of blog posts like in 2020 that like started to kind of like reinvent that creative part of my brain. And I think that belief once again got stronger of like, I have a really powerful voice and I really enjoy doing this and I should be doing it more. So,
wow, thanks for the story. Going back to Inside Out 2, it's really interesting because it's just like, you're right. Like it's very real that sometimes our beliefs, the power of our beliefs shift over time, and to hear those different environments shape it. But having the belief young gives such an opportunity to build on it and to strengthen it in a really profound way, that even as you sort of work alongside an author, I don't know how, is this right? Is this like, okay, but there's still an underlying belief there.
Yeah.
Such a gift. I learned such a gift to give to our children, to be like, oh,
yeah,
we believe in you early on, and form and foster those beliefs over time.
And I think it's really cool to think about how, as like also as like friends, as teammates, as whatever label you want to put on it, like that people in your life, whoever they are, have the opportunity to help strengthen that belief for you as well. Like we have the power to help someone feel that. And I think even looking back at like working with Seth in seeing how he writes, I also like love surrounding myself with people who are also great writers, because it helps me become a great writer. And he helped me in so many ways in trusting myself more. And I think that experience of watching him do his thing and ship his work without overthinking it, again, that belief like strengthened just in ways that maybe I wasn't expecting so much. And so I think it's interesting, like how even when friends say certain things, we like capture that in our mind of like, oh, that's like something that now strengthens this belief that might have, not been as strong in that moment. So, wow, what a profound movie. I really enjoyed my experience watching it.
So, such a good movie. We could definitely do a whole episode just on learnings. Finding your groove just from Inside Out 1 and 2.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Okay, well, to kind of wrap up what we've been going on a journey on over the last little bit, would love to hear, I guess, like, one of the things that we've talked about in a lot of these episodes is that compass of like, what is that compass for yourself? I'm curious, as you look ahead, is there anything that you're really excited about, whether it's related to your compass, to a goal that you have in mind, to something you want to bring to life? Like, what is it that you're looking forward to in the future as you trust that compass?
I think in this journey of finding your groove, or finding my groove, there's been a moment for me that happened in building Groove where I shifted from this is a sprint to I really want to run this marathon. Like I found something that brought me joy, that was like a container that continues to allow me to grow, allows me to work with people that bring me joy, and customers and groovers and members that I love serving. And I think when that internal shift happens, where you like start something, you're early in your any part of inflection point or shift in your career, and you're still early, it's sort of, you don't know where it's going. And for me, something in the shift is like, oh, I want to make sure I can run this for a long time. And in that shift, in that different shift, it allowed me to take a step back and go, okay, how do I redesign how I work so I can do it for the long term? I don't really even have so much more to say on it than that, apart from like the thing that brings me joy is like landing on that clarity. And I think a lot of people, it means that, I see it in my own marriage, when you meet someone and you're dating and you're yeah, there are things that work and things that don't work, but you're not really trying to fix all the things that don't work. You're like, I don't know where this is going. And then you commit to someone forever, subject to contract. And then you start to look at the things that don't work and go, oh, how do I make this sustainable in the long term?
Right.
And I just hope for people that are listening, if there's enough internal clarity, that you now give yourself the space to take a step back and say, what do I need to do to make this sustainable for me, that I can continue to run this? Like, how does my workday need to look? How do I think about my year? How do I think about goals? How do I think about human connection? How do I think about finances? And I think that shift, I'm just really excited about, because it's opened up a lot more possibility to say, oh, how do I make this work for me as much as the world around me? And yeah, I'm really curious to come back and share some of the emergent things from that in the coming months.
Nice. Before we go, one of the things that you just said that I want to just dig into a little bit more is you are obsessed. You love these kinds of people, like the kinds of people that we've made this podcast for, the kinds of people that, we've made Groove for. Would love to hear just like a little bit of the why behind that. Like, I think that so much of, when you are on this path, the people that you surround yourself with, the people that you are building with and building for, like, I think there's so much power in making that decision of, these are the people that I really want to be working with and working for. How, I guess, like, would just love to hear a little bit more about like why these people, and how has that brought you joy in the last several years?
I guess like the heart of a lot of my motivations of things I do in my life come from some really deep beliefs. One of which is, I think, how we show up in community, how we build community, how we connect with humans around us, whatever form it takes, who we surround ourselves with, whatever language it is, really defines how much we can fully step into ourselves and fully be alive. Like, I really think that being in the fullness of aliveness is around finding people that can help challenge you and also can help lift you through parts of yourself. And that like drives me. And I think for a lot of people, like, the system works. Like, I wouldn't want to say that I'm like not anti the system or anti corporate 9 to 5. I mean, there's shadow sides to everything and there's things I don't like about it. But my motivation doesn't come from that. But there are a lot of people, me included, that structure doesn't work for, doesn't allow me to thrive. And when you step out, it can feel really lonely. I know that there are moments in my life and those times in my education where I felt alone. I was like, wow, I'm smart. I'm around a bunch of other smart people, but like, this isn't working for me. Like, that's hard. That's like a really hard experience. And that has been compounded in different ways of not having friends, but not feeling seen in the fullness of who you are in a way that can bring out the fullness of who you are. And I deeply identify with that. And I think that it's more and more possible to walk unconventional paths. And it brings me joy when people find their people and are able to turn something that might be difficult at the beginning into something that allows them to thrive through life. And to continue to get more and more out of walking their unique path, but walking their unique path with other people that are walking their unique paths. That means that none of us are really walking alone. Like, we're really walking together. And I see that as like the fullness of society, that people can really be themselves. And this is a really great place to start, because this is like a group of humans, me included, where it's like, we need to design something new. And I love spending my time like figuring out how to do that.
You and me both. Well, thanks so much for this fun little episode that was so special and just us. And I guess, yeah, that's the end of it. I guess we don't really need to do a proper outro. I guess I'll say that since there's not too much to go back and reflect on, since it's the two of us, if you want to check out in the show notes how to hang out with us inside of the Groove community, go ahead and check out the link in there. And our newsletter, Finding Your Groove, also the same title as this podcast, super easy to find, but you can also find it in the show notes. And us on LinkedIn. I guess that's it.
That's it. That's where we hang out. That's where you can find us. That's where you can hear about us.
We like doing things differently over there.
Yeah. Taylor, thank you for asking me questions and
for sure
exploring this together.
All right. Have a good one. Bye.